What happens when a congresswoman's raw emotion collides with a press secretary's ice-cold resolve on live national television? Jasmine Crockett came in ready to confront, and Karoline Leavitt didn't flinch. What started as a policy hearing erupted into a cultural firestorm, with the entire nation picking sides. Was it chaos or clarity, passion or principle? This wasn't just politics, it was a moment that revealed the soul of America in real time. And as the shouting faded, the deeper question remained. Who do we trust to speak for us when everything's on the line? Watch to the end. This is the story everyone's talking about. The marble halls of the Capitol had never felt heavier. It was just past 9:00 a.m. in Washington, but inside the Rayburn hearing room, the air was already thick, almost oppressive. Staffers hustled down the corridor, reporters clutched mics and notebooks, and every smartphone in the gallery was live streaming. Something was coming. Everyone knew it. This wasn't just another committee meeting. This was the opening round of a high-stakes national clash, a federal hearing on the Online Responsibility Act, introduced by Texas Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. If passed, the bill would give the federal government sweeping authority to flag and remove harmful speech from public platforms like X, formerly Twitter. Supporters hailed it as a long overdue guardrail against hate, disinformation, and online harassment. Critics, especially constitutional conservatives, warned it was a muzzle disguised as safety. The nation was split. On cable news, the debate was red hot. On social media, the hashtags had already begun to trend. But here in the Capitol, where the marble echoed every footstep, it was about to get personal and explosive. The chairman had barely taken his seat when the doors opened without announcement. Karoline Leavitt walked in, alone. No entourage, no legal team, just her signature black blazer heels that clicked against the floor like a metronome, and a file folder tucked under one arm. The 27-year-old White House press secretary, already famous for her calm under fire, took her seat at the witness table without a glance at the gallery. She adjusted the microphone, unscrewed the cap from a plastic water bottle, and waited. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. The silence was chilling. Then exactly 1 minute later, the second door slammed open and the storm arrived. Jasmine Crockett entered like a red warning light. Clad in a fitted scarlet dress, her eyes scanning the room like searchlights, she moved fast. Not toward anyone, but straight to the table stacked with her briefing binder, printouts of social media posts and copies of the bill. She didn't acknowledge Leavitt. Didn't need to. This was war, and the lines had already been drawn. The cameras snapped. Phones rose. A CNN reporter whispered into her mic, "Here we go." Every seat in the hearing room was filled, journalists, aides, citizens, lobbyists, even a few off-duty cops in the back. This wasn't just policy. This was the battle for the digital public square. A question that cut deeper than politics. Do Americans still have the right to say what they believe online, even if it's ugly? Or must speech be tamed to protect society from itself? From where he sat at the head of the chamber, the committee chairman looked like a man bracing for a thunderstorm. "Order will come to session," he said, gaveling once. "This hearing will consider the proposed Online Responsibility Act and the government's role in managing digital content platforms." But few were listening to him. Their eyes were locked on the two women, two visions of America, seated 12 feet apart. On one side, Jasmine Crockett, the fierce Texas Democrat lawyer by trade, crusader by conviction. Known for fiery floor speeches and viral mic drops, she came armed with data case studies and heartbreak. On the other, Karoline Leavitt, the youngest press secretary in U.S. history, unshakable, media-hardened, trusted mouthpiece for a polarizing administration. Her face unreadable, her posture composed, her mission clear. The hearing had not yet begun, but the battle had. In that moment, no one spoke. The cameras zoomed, the air was still, and every viewer watching live from their homes, offices, or hospital beds across America felt the same thing. This wasn't going to be civil. This wasn't going to be easy. This was going to be the moment. Everything exploded. And somehow they couldn't look away. The hearing room remained still for a moment longer, the kind of stillness that comes right before a thunderclap. The chairman's gavel rested idle, and the tension, the raw electric tension, now filled every corner of the chamber. Two women sat at the same table, but it might as well have been a battlefield. No greetings, no softening of tone. Just the undeniable sense that something irreversible was about to be said. Then came the strike. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett leaned into her microphone. Her voice didn't start loud, but it cut. Crisp. Personal. I remember holding a mother in Dallas. She began, eyes narrowing. Her daughter was 14. She took her own life after being attacked on social media day after day, week after week. Posts filled with hate, with lies, with cruelty so sharp it stole the will to live. She paused. The room held its breath. We can call that freedom. But I ask you, if that's what freedom looks like now, then maybe freedom is dead. Silence. Not a stir. Even the clicking from the press row stopped. Crockett didn't blink. Her fingers moved to the tablet in front of her, and with a swipe, the large display screen behind her lit up. A reel of real posts from X flooded the screen, conspiracies about election fraud, violent threats, racial slurs, anti-immigrant hate speech, and calls for political uprising. Crockett didn't need to explain. The images spoke for themselves. Hashtags like #CivilWar2, memes mocking school shooting victims, accusations, lies, rage. Crockett raised her voice, now unmistakably angry. This is what your administration refuses to regulate. This is what you call letting people speak. You say you're protecting freedom, but all I see is chaos and pain. All eyes turned to Karoline Leavitt. She didn't flinch, didn't reach for her water, didn't even shift in her seat. Instead, she leaned forward slightly, just enough to bring the microphone close. Her voice was level, low, and steady, like a cold current beneath Crockett's firestorm. Congresswoman, she said, freedom has never been neat. It's not polite. It's not comfortable. And yes, it's messy, dangerous, and full of noise. But that's because it belongs to the people, not the government. A murmur rippled through the room. Leavitt continued, when you try to sanitize it, when you start sweeping away what you deem offensive, you're not just cleaning up hate. You're cleaning out dissent. And once that happens, Congresswoman, you don't have truth anymore. You only have control. Her words didn't rise in pitch, but somehow they hit harder. Across the room, lawmakers shifted in their seats. Staffers exchanged glances. Even a few journalists paused their note-taking to watch more closely. Crockett sat forward, her hands gripping the table edge. So, you're saying we should just let it happen? She fired back. Let children be bullied to death. Let our democracy be torn apart by disinformation. Let people post threats, start movements based on lies, and pretend that's just freedom working as intended, I'm saying. Leavitt replied, her voice still cold as steel, that the cost of freedom is hearing what you despise. The alternative, letting people like you decide what qualifies as hate and what doesn't. For the first time, a soft but audible gasp came from somewhere in the audience. The clash wasn't just verbal, it was philosophical. Two versions of America facing each other across a table with the nation watching. Crockett's jaw tightened. She tapped the screen again, scrolling to a tweet featuring an image of a noose overlaid with political slogans. The caption read, "Time to take our country back by any means." This was posted last week. Still live. Still getting likes. And you're sitting there defending that, she asked, incredulous. How many lives do we have to lose before your side wakes up? Leavitt didn't look at the screen. Her gaze was locked on Crockett's. I'm not defending the post, she said. I'm defending the right to post it. That's the difference. That difference is killing us, Crockett snapped. The temperature in the room seemed to spike. The chairman shifted uncomfortably, tapping his gavel twice, not forcefully, more, as a reminder to himself that he was still technically in charge. But no one looked his way. Leavitt sat back, slowly crossing her hands in front of her. "If you want to stop hate," she said calmly, "start by changing hearts, not by censoring speech. Because once you start shutting people up, they don't disappear. They just get louder somewhere else." A few lawmakers, mostly Republican, nodded subtly. Others shook their heads. No one clapped. The tension didn't allow for applause. Crockett inhaled sharply, then steadied herself. "I'm not trying to silence everyone," she said, voice now tighter. "I'm trying to stop the bleeding. There's a difference." Leavitt gave the faintest tilt of her head. "But you're using the same blade." That line landed like a gut punch. No volume, no shouting, just precision. Crockett looked away for a second as if collecting herself. The audience leaned forward. The chairman cleared his throat. "Let's proceed with committee questions." But no one heard him. All eyes stayed locked on the two women. It was clear to everyone this wasn't a policy discussion anymore. This was a fight for the soul of American speech. To the viewers at home, especially older Americans who've lived through civil rights marches, Vietnam protests, Watergate hearings, and 9/11 briefings, this moment felt familiar and entirely new. It echoed the moral stakes of the past, but sounded the alarm for the digital frontier. This wasn't left versus right. It was control versus chaos. Truth versus permission. Emotion versus principle. And in the center sat two women who couldn't have been more different, but whose words were shaping the next chapter of what freedom would mean in America. And it was only just beginning. The storm finally hit. Up to this point, the room had held its breath, sitting on the razor's edge between control and combustion. Words had been sharp, the tension unbearable, but the battle between Karoline Leavitt's steely restraint and Jasmine Crockett's rising fury was still confined within the boundaries of a heated debate. Until it wasn't. Crockett's chair scraped backward, her hands gripping the table like she needed to steady herself from toppling over her own outrage. Her voice broke through the chamber with no warning, raw and loud like thunder. "You're defending cruelty behind the word freedom. You've never seen what lies do to people's lives, have you?" The entire room jumped at the sound. Even seasoned committee members froze. No one expected her to scream, not yet. Not like this. And then it happened. Crockett slammed her hand onto the desk. Hard. A loud crack echoed like a gunshot. Her binder snapped open, loose papers exploding into the air and landing across the table like shrapnel. Her face was flushed, lips trembling, and hands visibly shaking. This wasn't just anger, it was heartbreak, morphing into rage. A whisper of collective shock swept through the chamber. Reporters stopped typing. Viewers at home leaned closer to their screens. Phones lit up. Someone in the back began recording in portrait mode. The clip would hit X within minutes. Across the table, Karoline Leavitt didn't blink. She looked up, slow and deliberate, the way a lighthouse might rise above a hurricane. Her voice didn't rise, didn't tremble, didn't even carry a trace of discomfort. "I didn't write those words," she said evenly. "But I won't silence the people who did." It wasn't just a response. It was a challenge. Crockett's eyes burned. She lifted a shaking finger and pointed straight at Leavitt. "You're hiding behind principles to avoid basic morality." She wasn't just shouting, now she was unraveling. Every ounce of professional polish evaporated. Her voice cracked again. Her breath hitched. There was nothing rehearsed left in her delivery. This was raw, unrehearsed emotion, the kind of emotional outburst most politicians avoid at all costs. Leavitt's response. Nothing moved. She didn't reach for her notes. She didn't adjust her microphone. She simply looked at Crockett with an expression that could only be described as still. Maybe she said finally, "But you're screaming so people will fear the truth." The line landed with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. For a moment, just a heartbeat, Crockett stood frozen. Her lips parted, but no words came. Her chest rose and fell sharply, trying to collect enough air for a comeback. But she didn't speak. The audience felt it. The silence turned heavy again. This time not from anticipation, but from shock. Cameras clicked wildly now, capturing the moment Crockett stood like a volcano mid-eruption, while Leavitt remained seated like a marble statue, eyes locked ahead, jaw steady, voice unchanged. Aides in the back exchanged glances. One Democratic staffer started texting furiously. A Republican aide smirked behind their hand. On X, the moment was already viral. Someone posted a clip with the caption, "She just lost it. Again." It caught fire within minutes. Others joined in. Karoline doesn't even flinch. Unbelievable. Crockett's fire turned to a flameout. Truth doesn't yell. It waits. But just as many came to Crockett's defense. Of course, she screamed, she cares. If you're not outraged, you're not paying attention. Silence in the face of hate is complicity. The hearing room didn't know what to do next. Even the chairman, who'd been lightly tapping his gavel in a futile attempt to reclaim order, stopped altogether. His hand hovered over the block, unsure whether to intervene or let it burn itself out. Crockett finally sat down, but her expression was far from calm. Her hand trembled slightly as she gathered the papers she had scattered. Her voice, when she spoke again, was quieter, but just as sharp. "You're not defending speech. You're defending a system that lets people poison each other with lies." Leavitt gave no reaction, but her next words came with surgical calm. "And you're defending a system where someone like you decides what truth gets to survive." That was it. The debate had left the realm of legislation. It was now existential. It wasn't about what was on the platforms. It was about who gets to decide, and what happens when that decision is wrong. Outside the chamber, cable networks broke into the live stream with commentary. Fox News called it the most disciplined dismantling of emotional politics in a decade. MSNBC countered with Jasmine Crockett, exposed what this bill is really about: protecting people from platforms that profit off pain. On talk radio, callers phoned in from Georgia, Ohio, Montana, and rural Iowa, many of them seniors, many of them veterans of past civic fights, and their voices weren't angry, they were confused. "I fought for freedom," one caller said, "but I also buried friends because someone believed a lie. Who do I trust now?" And that was the core of it. This wasn't just a hearing. It was a mirror. America in that moment saw itself on that screen, divided, emotionally raw, trying to define truth while keeping freedom intact. And in the center of that image were two women, one cracking under the pressure of a pain too great to swallow, the other holding fast to principles colder than steel. Both believed they were right, but only one still had her composure. And as the chairman finally picked up the gavel, sighed and said, Let's move on to committee questions," no one was really listening. Because the moment had already happened, and it wasn't going away. It took less than 10 minutes. After the outburst, after Karoline Leavitt's icy rebuttal, after Jasmine Crockett's voice cracked under the weight of her fury, America exploded. Not in the hearing room where the gavel finally restored some order. No, the real explosion happened online, where there were no gavels, no time limits, and no rules. Social media lit up like a dry forest catching flame in high wind. On X, the clip of Crockett slamming her hand on the table was looped, dissected, slowed down, remixed. It was captioned, She just lost it. Again. And on the flip side, another post, with just as much traction, read, "That's the scream of a mother who's had enough. Listen to her." TikTok creators wasted no time. By noon, the platform was filled with side-by-side duets, one person playing Leavitt perfectly still and measured while the other acted as Crockett, shouting, pointing, emotionally spiraling. Some made light of it. Others turned it into performance art. The viral phrase, "fire versus ice," live. And then came the memes. Leavitt's line, "Freedom isn't silence, it's the right to speak even if it offends you," was clipped stylized with American flags and black and white stills of the Constitution behind her face. It was posted with hashtags like #FreeSpeechMatters and #LeavittUnshaken. Some turned it into posters, others into digital wallpapers. Meanwhile, Crockett's cry, "I scream because silence is deadly," was no less powerful. It was taken up as a slogan printed on t-shirts and banners sold online overnight. A popular Etsy shop released a mug with Crockett's profile silhouette and the phrase in bold, red text. Sales spiked by the hour. Instagram reels flooded with replays. People posted from coffee shops, churches, truck stops, veterans' halls, and classrooms. One viral comment read, "Karoline is the calm we need. She doesn't flinch because she has truth on her side." Another countered, "Crockett is what courage looks like when the system keeps ignoring pain." The media war came next. By mid-afternoon, Fox News aired an emergency segment titled, "Discipline versus Drama: What Congress Learned from Leavitt Today." A former judge praised Karoline's composure. "You don't win arguments by yelling. You win them by standing your ground with reason." And she did. Conservative pundits ran with it. In an age of emotional politics, Leavitt is logic incarnate. She didn't shout. She didn't cry. She stood. And that scared them. But over on MSNBC, the mood was different. They replayed Crockett's speech in full with somber piano music behind it. A voiceover said Jasmine Crockett didn't lose control. She broke through. In a world where truth is often buried under civility, she dared to raise her voice. A progressive host stated plainly, "Sometimes you have to scream to be heard over the silence. And sometimes being calm means being complicit." Cable news wasn't alone. Talk radio lit up. From South Carolina to Michigan, callers weighed in. A 72-year-old veteran in Ohio said, "I fought for the First Amendment. I respect Leavitt. But I also buried a grandson who took his life after online bullying. I understand Crockett's pain." Another caller from Texas countered, "Crockett lost it. You can't scream the truth into people's ears. You persuade. You stand firm. You don't break." At diners and gas stations across the country, it became the topic. Not just in Washington. In Boise, in Nashville, in Amarillo. Even church circles picked sides. "God gave us a voice," said one Southern Baptist pastor in Alabama, "and sometimes crying out is righteous." "Yes," replied another in Iowa, "but Scripture also says, a gentle answer turns away wrath." That's what Leavitt gave. Cultural figures jumped in. A country singer with 3 million followers tweeted Leavitt's silence was louder than a scream. God bless her. Meanwhile, a best-selling poet reposted Crockett's clip with the caption, "That voice. That was the sound of every woman who's been told to calm down while the world burned." Comedians, influencers, war vets, and school teachers. Everyone had something to say. America didn't just watch this moment. It picked sides, and it did so loudly. But beyond the noise, something more subtle began to take shape. Older Americans, especially those who've lived through the civil rights era, the Cold War, Vietnam, 9/11, felt a strange kind of echo. Not déjà vu, but something deeper. A realization that once again the country wasn't just debating policy. It was fighting for the definition of who we are. A retired Marine colonel posted, "Leavitt reminds me of the officers who led with calm. Crockett reminds me of the soldiers who cried after the dust settled. Both have value. Don't pick one and call it truth." By nightfall, the hearing itself was old news. The battle was now cultural. It was digital. It was emotional. And it wasn't slowing down. Some argued the moment had galvanized a new generation of speech warriors, people defending the right to offend, even at great social cost. Others said it revealed just how deeply wounded America's conscience really is, and how little patience is left for restraint. But whether you saw Karoline Leavitt as a pillar of principle or Jasmine Crockett as the conscience of the unheard, one thing was certain: the lines had been drawn, and a nation divided by truth, pain, and principle once again found itself shouting across the same table, wondering if anyone was still listening. By nightfall, the roar of the hearing room had faded into the distant hum of headlines and hashtags. But the storm hadn't ended, it had simply moved indoors. Behind the stone walls of the Capitol, away from the flash of cameras and the noise of public judgment, two women sat alone. Not together, not reconciled, but each grappling with the same thing in silence: what just happened, and what it really meant. Karoline Leavitt stepped into her private office just after 7:00 p.m. The sky over Washington was painted in fading amber light, the monuments outside her window glowing faintly in the dusk. She shut the door quietly, kicked off her heels, and slipped out of her black blazer. For the first time all day, her shoulders dropped. She didn't speak for several seconds. Then, without turning toward her aide seated nearby, she whispered, "I know I did the right thing. But I also saw it. I saw the pain she was screaming for." Her voice didn't shake. It wasn't regret, but something quieter, more thoughtful. Acknowledgement, perhaps. Not of failure, but of the complexity beneath the confrontation. In public, she had stood like steel, unflinching, calculated, cold, some had said. But in this room behind closed doors, she let out a deep breath that seemed to carry the weight of everything she hadn't said out loud. "Crockett cares," she murmured again. "I get that. But there's a difference between caring and controlling." She didn't cry. She didn't crack. But for a moment her eyes lingered on the city lights outside, as if asking herself whether the people she defended today would even understand what she stood for. Or if they ever truly would. Across the Capitol complex, a different silence filled another room. Jasmine Crockett, now out of the red dress and wrapped in a loose navy shawl, sat on the edge of a couch in her own office. Her face, stripped of TV makeup, was pale and puffy. Her aide, a young woman no older than her own niece, stood quietly nearby, unsure if comfort was welcome. The echo of her voice slamming through that hearing room still haunted her ears. She could hear it even now. "You're defending cruelty" behind the word freedom. It wasn't a line she had planned to say. It had burst out of her like a fireball, uncontrolled, undeniable. She dabbed at the corner of her eye with a tissue. Not out of shame, but release. "Did I yell too loud?" she asked softly, almost to herself. Maybe. But if I didn't yell, would anyone have heard me? There was no answer. She slumped back slightly and let the moment hang in the air. Her aides had told her she'd won Twitter. They'd shown her the shirts being printed with her quote. But that didn't comfort her. Not really. Viral didn't mean victory. And despite the applause from her side of the aisle, she couldn't shake the sense that she'd lost something, or exposed something too raw for the country to accept. "People think I lost control," she said, wiping under her eye. "Maybe they're right. But I've seen families ripped apart by what they call just speech. I've been to funerals where silence killed more than bullets." No one interrupted. There was nothing to say. She leaned forward again, elbows on her knees. Karoline sat there like ice, she added. I hated it, but I couldn't ignore it. She didn't flinch. I wanted to shake her, make her feel it. That was the truth. Beneath her anger wasn't just disagreement, it was desperation. She hadn't come to score points. She came to make pain visible. But somewhere along the way, her voice had outpaced her message, and now she wasn't sure how the country had taken it. Meanwhile, Leavitt sat alone with a cup of decaf, watching the coverage silently. A Fox News chyron labeled her the calm conservative. A commentator praised her restraint under fire. But even she knew it wasn't that simple. They think I don't feel anything, she said flatly. That's the trade-off. If you stay calm, they call you cold. If you show emotion, they call you unfit. It wasn't self-pity. It was realism. And it wasn't just about her or Crockett. It was about the nation they represented, a country that no longer knew how to disagree without destroying. 2 women, 2 rooms. One fight that hadn't really ended, just paused. Leavitt reached for her tablet, watched a clip of the exchange for the first time. She flinched slightly, not at her words, but at Crockett's eyes in that moment. They weren't angry. They were pleading. And suddenly she felt a twinge of something she hadn't expected: respect. Not for the delivery, but for the conviction. She wasn't acting, Leavitt said to no one. She really believes this. Down the hall, Crockett scrolled through posts about herself, some cruel, some worshipful. She paused at one, an older woman in Georgia holding up a homemade sign that read, "She yelled for all of us who lost someone to silence." It brought a weak smile to her lips, then tears again. In that moment, it became clear no one had won. The media would spin it. Supporters would argue about who owned the other. But neither of them left that room feeling victorious. Because the truth was, they were both alone, in different ways. Karoline Leavitt carried the burden of principle, knowing that her calm might look detached. Jasmine Crockett carried the burden of pain, knowing that her passion might overshadow her message. Both were right, and both were punished for it. Outside, the Capitol dome glowed in the dark, silent, unmoved, as if indifferent to the human struggle unfolding inside. But for millions of Americans watching, especially those who've lived through decades of history, that night said something profound. The fight for truth isn't clean. It's messy, human, and often lonely. And sometimes it happens not in the headlines, but in the quiet rooms where conviction and conscience are forced to sit with the aftermath. Tomorrow they'd both go back to the floor. Cameras would roll again. Scripts would return. But tonight, in 2 separate offices, 2 women sat with the silence left behind by a nation still screaming in 2 directions. By the next morning, the echoes of the hearing had reached far beyond Capitol Hill. The marble chambers and echoing hallways had fallen silent, but across the country, from small-town diners to high school classrooms, the real debate had only just begun. It was no longer just about Jasmine Crockett or Karoline Leavitt. It was no longer confined to polished wood desks and televised committee chairs. It had become America's conversation, a national mirror reflecting what we've become when disagreement turns into division, and when passion drowns out persuasion. In a public high school in central Missouri, a civic education teacher wheeled a cart-mounted TV into her classroom, the kind older viewers might remember from school fire drills and history lessons. With the click of a remote, the screen flickered to life. She pressed play. The class of juniors watched wide-eyed as Crockett slammed the table and shouted, her voice cracking from frustration. Then came Leavitt's measured stare and quiet rebuttal. The kids didn't stay silent for long. She was totally out of line, one student said, crossing his arms. No, she was finally saying what no one else will, a girl shot back. Leavitt didn't even react. That's leadership. Or cowardice, another muttered. Voices rose, chairs shifted. A new kind of chaos, one of conviction, took over the classroom. The teacher didn't interrupt. She let it simmer. For once, civics felt real, not a chapter in a dusty textbook. These weren't abstract rights, they were alive, tangled in the heat of that video. Across the country, in a quiet living room in rural Ohio, a retired factory worker sat in a recliner watching the replay on cable news. His 8-year-old grandson perched on the armrest, eyes darting between the screen and his grandfather's face. On the screen, a commentator barked about another meltdown from the left, while the footage replayed for the 3rd time. The old man sighed. "You know, kid," he said, remote, resting on his lap, "back in my day folks disagreed all the time. Vietnam, Nixon, integration. But we still listened to each other." He shook his head, eyes fixed on the screen. "Now everybody just yells." The boy didn't say anything, but he leaned closer, instinctively sensing that this wasn't just a moment on television. It was history being made again. In church basements, barber shops, VFW halls, and family kitchen tables, people replayed the moment again and again, not just to watch what was said, but to try and understand why it struck so deeply. Older Americans who had lived through real upheaval, the Cold War, civil rights marches, Watergate, recognized with something painfully familiar. "We're not just arguing policy anymore," one World War II vet said at a community breakfast in Kansas. "We're fighting about what it even means to be American." The faces were new, the battleground digital, but the heart of the conflict felt timeless. Jasmine Crockett's fire hadn't just been a breakdown. It had become a battle cry for those who've lost someone to lies, or who feel unseen in the noise of modern discourse. Her scream wasn't just volume, it was a signal of pain, amplified into national reckoning. Karoline Leavitt's calm wasn't just composure, it was a statement of discipline, a belief that order protects freedom, even when chaos is pounding on the door. Her restraint wasn't cold, it was calculated courage in a room ready to explode. But neither woman walked away untouched. And maybe, just maybe, that's where the truth begins. As the day wore on, more voices joined the fray. A veteran journalist posted Leavitt represented what institutions are supposed to be measured unemotional. Crockett represented what people feel when institutions fail them. America needs both, but we don't know how to hold both. A small-town pastor wrote Jesus overturned tables, but he also stayed silent before Pilate. Sometimes the method isn't wrong, it's the motive that matters. Even in Washington, far from the cameras, staffers on both sides admitted something quietly, that what happened in that hearing room hadn't been scripted, hadn't been fake, and hadn't been entirely expected. It was real, messy, human. And maybe that's the point. Truth doesn't always shout, but it also doesn't always whisper. Sometimes truth sits quietly between a slammed desk and an unflinching stare. Not in the noise, but in the tension. Not in the certainty, but in the questions left behind. Because freedom isn't about always being right. It's about being willing to listen. Even when it hurts. Even when it burns. And in a nation where emotion often drowns reason, the deeper struggle is whether we can still hear each other when the shouting stops. As the sun set again over the Capitol dome and the video reached its millionth view, a quiet screen faded to black. And in white letters it read, "In a world where emotion drowns reason, freedom must fight to be heard again." Not the kind of freedom that always wins. Not the kind of freedom that makes everyone comfortable, but the kind that makes space for both voices to speak. And maybe, just maybe, for the country to finally listen. Life lesson from the hearing room, a message for every American. In today's divided world, it's easy to forget how to disagree without destroying one another. The fiery exchange between Jasmine Crockett and Karoline Leavitt wasn't just about free speech. It was a reminder of something deeper, that truth doesn't belong to one tone, one party, or one generation. Sometimes truth speaks through passion. Other times it whispers through principle. But either way, it demands that we listen before we shout. For those of us who've lived through wars, protests, and decades of change, we know one thing for sure. Freedom is fragile when we stop listening to those we disagree with. The lesson here isn't about who was right or wrong. It's about finding the strength to hold the tension without tearing each other apart. So next time a conversation gets heated, ask yourself, am I trying to win or to understand? If this message resonates with you, leave a comment below and tell us what you think. Don't forget to like and subscribe, because more stories like this are coming and your voice matters in this conversation.